All right, welcome to Sunday school this morning for our last installment of the sermon on the Mount. So, brief review because we're going to be reviewing on like the backside here. We've seen starts with heavenly affections, heavenly obedience, heavenly audience, heavenly priorities. Last week we saw heavenly perspective. Today, we're going to see the heavenly results of what true righteousness actually does. Now, before we really get into the results, let's draw attention to what the problem is here. What would it actually look like if we lived this way? And I'm just going to, have an overview here of how hard this gets. If we really embrace heavenly affections, then all human schemes of sanctification would go right out the window, because if everything is based on God's work in the soul, this is not something we can just manufacture by a 12-step plan. How many Christian books would then, not need to be published? Embracing heavenly obedience means disposing of external standards as a gauge of their righteousness, which sounds really good, right? But how do we as a church know who's spiritually mature or not? It gets harder, right? I mean, if we can't tell just by those outward things, how do we tell? That's going to get complicated. Re-evaluating everything we do that has to do with a human. Now, let's put this into perspective here. I spend a lot of time working with the Mo's on things that have to do with human audiences. I don't think God is watching this via the YouTube feed, but we spend a lot of time on this. Is that wrong? No. But it brings up a question: how much time and effort are we spending on things that have to do with the people and with the mere earthly side of things? It raises some interesting questions of how important are lights and sound systems and things. Can we still have church if we don't have those outward things? Trusting God with every aspect of my life, I think that's pretty fresh in the minds here, but that's, oh man, if I actually did that, that would change a lot of things. And if we really embraced a heavenly perspective, what would that mean for our real standing on earth? I mean, this could get ugly real quick, right? So, this is the part of most sermons I hate. I hate the endings of a lot of sermons, especially ones I've preached. Because, especially when it's a really profound and deep text of Scripture, and you spend the meat of your sermon just really delving into the beauty of that text. Then you get to the end, and what do a lot of the preachers do, including me? Here's where we have to make it earthly. And we don't do that on purpose. We should be making it relatable and applicable. But what we often do is, well, the easiest way to make it relatable and applicable is to make it earthly. So we talk about earthly things. And you know what? It's not just preachers. My least productive part of my own Bible study is this part. When I read a text that's challenging, and I'm like, ooh, challenging, let's make it earthly. Then it's a little less challenging, a little easy to be a bite-sized thing to make me feel better throughout my day, and I don't have to struggle all day with it. This is what most preachers do, but this is not what Jesus did. This whole sermon has been about heavenly righteousness. He has not stopped now and said, okay, now let's make this earthly. Now let's make this understandable. Instead of drawing the heavenly truths down to earth, he takes this one opportunity to bring us up to him. Everything about this sermon is completely incompatible with earthly metrics. And I think we started to see that as it went. Like, ooh, everything that I judge based upon, man looks on the outward appearance. So I really have been judging on the outward appearance. And so far, this sermon is portraying a righteousness that just doesn't fit. Jesus embraces this. And he brings out the truly paradoxical results of living this righteousness on earth. And let's jump right in here so we can save time for like at the end. We'll see the four paradoxical results of living this righteousness. The first is found in Matthew 7, verses 13 through 14, a very common, well-known passage here. Earthly righteousness appears safe and reliable, but it leads to death. Now, I think we've all seen this. I remember, now I'm going to use an example that's kind of, I was just talking to Brandon about examples that will show the point, but not be not be a rabbit trail. And I'm going to pick that music because I think all of you in this room knows that I have some pretty conservative views when it comes to music, and if anything, too much so. I remember talking to someone about our approach to the music. Because for a long time, our approach, and when I say our approach, I mean mine too, because I was flag waving here. Our approach was draw a line and say on this side of the line, everything is flawlessly good and doesn't need to be evaluated. On that side, everything is absolutely wrong and worldly. And it was easier. It really was. These past 2 to 3, maybe 4 or 5 years, we've been learning a lot more about music in church. A lot more about its purpose, a lot more about why we do it, a lot more of the theology and the history behind it. And that's kind of dangerous, isn't it? Because what if we don't all agree? What if there's room for a debate? What if some people do this and some do that? And it was scary at first. And believe me, I was scared as well. I was like, oh man, this is how it starts. Next thing, we're going to have drums. I mean, I'll admit it, I was terrified of this because an earthly sphere, that game of righteousness seems more safe. Now, the text says, enter ye at the straight gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction. We all know that verse. Let me point out how paradoxical that is. How many of you like to go down alleyways? Like, those narrow alleyways, especially at night, right? Great places to go. How many of you like to go, leave the main roads and go travel through that little hole in the fence that leads across the train tracks and onto that little path where, and where the underpass is, right? Is that more or less safe? Less safe. Generally, and it's true now, it was even more true then. Generally speaking, broad ways were safe. Those narrow, winding mountain roads, you're asking to get mugged. Those small gates, if you had legitimate business in a city, what are you doing going through that tiny gate? Like, something's wrong here. On the surface, it seems like the wide way is the safe way. But Christ is saying that's the way that leads to death. And many there be that find it. Many go down that way. The small way, the way that seems dangerous, the way that seems scary, heavenly righteousness is scary. That is the way that leads to life. I think we as a church are stronger now when it comes to the realm of that music because we've spent 4 years learning from God's word and growing. It was not an easy process. We're like, great, let's just throw out the rules and do that whatever that we want. It took years of scriptural guidance, but we're stronger, aren't we? It was scary, but that was the way that led to life. Heavenly righteousness appears dangerous and dubious, but it does lead to life. I get it. I'm as scared as you about embracing a truly spiritual conception of righteousness. I like things black and white. I like to know who's good and who's bad, what's clear and what's not. This is scary. And few are going to find that way. I'm not just talking about Christians versus the world here. I'm talking about even among the Christians, it has always been so that external Christianity will be the majority. Okay? Just because everyone else is doesn't mean we can embrace a deeper, more spiritual view of the righteousness. Let's look at the paradoxical proponents here. Earthly righteousness is championed by the accomplished spokesman who can't walk the talk. It says, beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. Ye shall know them by careful analysis of their preaching. Oh, no, that's not what it says here. Ye shall know them by their fruits. A lot of people can preach well. Well, not me, but, like folks. There are a lot of people who can really write well, and I love the information age. I love that I can type in a few of the words and I can find sermons, I can find books, and I can read, and it's an awesome privilege. But I'm telling you, there are some really awesome guys out there who are saying some really great sounding things, but their lives show them to be wolves. And it can be hard to say, well, I mean, it sounds so good. What are their lives like? Which is why, let me put in a plug, not specifically for Pastor Wiggins, but specifically for your pastor, which happens to be the Pastor Wiggins. It's not it's not because your pastor is the better than big old celebrity, the Pastor blank. It's because you know your pastor. You have opportunity to see his life. And you know if his walk does not match his talk. You've seen it. You should trust your pastor more than some guy online because you have opportunity to see him. The prophets are communicators, and when we focus solely on what they say and don't look at what they do, we lose something very important, because you can talk a good game for a really long time. You can't live a lie that long. It's going to come out. The results of true righteousness is not shown in what you say. It's shown in what you do. You see here, there is literally nothing said about what the other guy says. It says, "For a good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit." So what exactly does that good proponent say? I don't know, because that's not the point. The point is that this person who is living the righteousness of God, you can see it in his life. I can see it in what he says, how he says it, how he acts, how he treats his family, how he acts at work. Every little way, that's how you know the people that you can trust. So let me challenge all of you on both sides of that. How trustworthy are you? I don't mean how well can you expound what you should or should not do. I don't mean how clearly you have things, divided out. How are you living? And should people trust you based on how you live? If not, don't pretend to be spiritual. You're not. I don't care how much you know about the righteousness of their God. Let me challenge you on the other side. Trust trustworthy folks who live it. Don't be taken in by smooth talkers. I'm going deliberately fast here so we can save time for at the end. So I'm really sorry. I know this text deserves more than this, but time is time. A paradoxical standard. And I have two texts here. The first is our sermon on like the Mount. But in Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46, Christ is expounding the judgment of the sheep and like the goats, of And this is another very familiar passage. I'm going to reference it here. I'm not read it, but you can go back and check it out. There were those to whom Christ said, "Come," and turn to rest. Because I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me a drink, I was naked and you clothed me. And they said, "Lord, when? When did we do these things? I don't remember this." He said, "As much as you've done it to the least of my brethren, you've done it unto me." But then there are those who he said, "Depart from me." And they said, "But Lord, haven't we done these mighty works?" And he said, "I never knew you, because when I came to you, you didn't do all those things." And they said, "But Lord, I don't remember that." And again he pointed to, "As much as ye have not done it unto them, you've not done it unto me." Now, keep that in mind as we look at our text here. Many will say unto me in that day, "Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name have cast out the devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works?" Earthly righteousness is judged on the basis of works, but is found in salvation. So these guys are quoting good works. I mean, is it a good thing to prophesy in Christ's name? Yes. Is it a good thing to cast out devils? At that point in history and in that context, yes. Is it a good thing to do many wonderful works? Yes. I hope we all do many wonderful works. And then will I profess unto them, "I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity." And that word for iniquity is a word that means lawlessness. You whose whole lives were lawless. So these people who have demanded to be judged based on their works, Christ says, "Okay, fine. Lawlessness, that's the works." Often the unrighteous people have good works. And due to those good works, they can come across as really great people. And guys, that's true in church too. And I'm going to be totally honest, sometimes I would seek out positions of ministry, not so I could actually minister, but so I could be seen as ministering, so folks would think I'm good. I can say, "Haven't you seen all the good things I've done in church?" I should tap on this side. There we go. If I'm gonna pat myself on like at the back, let's do it right here. But that can happen because we somehow think if I do enough good things, God is gonna say, "Wow, that Bill guy is really busy. Look at all the stuff he did." But if God really looked at my life based on my works, he would see lawlessness. And that's not going to change. If I preach 10,000 sermons, it's still not going to change the simple fact that if Jesus Christ looked at my life right now, he would see lawlessness. Heavenly righteousness is judged on the basis of its relationship to the judge. What did Christ say? "I never knew you. He didn't say, came close, but yeah, sorry. I never knew you. My righteousness is based on the fact that I have a deep and abiding relationship with Christ himself. And that's not just for that one time that when I got saved. That's true right now as I am saved. This is a present reality that my righteousness right now depends on how well I know my God, not based on what I do. I think sometimes, and we'll see this a bit more as we go on, we make salvation well, that was a thing that happened once. I was trusting in my own righteousness. Now I'm in his. Done. Now, being saved by faith, I'm perfected by works. True that righteousness is not that way. And again, nothing is said. I'm sorry, I messed up that slide. That was from the last one. It happens. So, but the point is here, it's not that Christ is drawing to those people who know me. They did even more works than you. Boy, look at that. You thought you did some works, but those people did more. That's not what he says here, because frankly, external Christians sometimes do more outward works because that's all they have. Saying those people who knew me, though, their works do follow. What did Christ say in Matthew 25? You did all these things. And they said, we did? We weren't even trying to. They just naturally did. If you know God, you're going to love God's flock. And if you don't love God's flock, don't say that you love God. Good works flow out of a heart that knows it's God. And they're the kind of the good works that don't ask for a show. And even when the judge of all this amazes me. The judge of all the earth said, good job. And they're saying, meh. But their heart was so focused on Jesus himself, not on their works, that they didn't even see all of the works that God was doing in them. Last but not least, we're going to see the paradoxical efforts. And again, this is a really familiar text here. Earthly righteousness is founded on visibly impressive efforts that cannot stand up to pressure. So now I'm not going to read this text because I think that we all know it quite well. The wise man who builds his house upon a rock, and the foolish man who builds his house on sand. Now let me put this out there here. This is not talking about the location of where they built their house. It's talking about how they built their house. Because if you look at the topography in most of Canaan, find me one place that's not sandy. Good luck. But if you look at that same topography, find me one place that doesn't have bedrock. Okay, maybe some parts in the desert, I'd have to dig them really deep, but that's why there were no towns built there. Most towns that were built on places that had bedrock but it was that covered in dust and sand. Now, common practice was, and a part of this had to do with their money, if you were just building a house to live in, you would build it on sand. You wouldn't have bothered to dig deep down to the bedrock, establish foundations, and build it up. And you could build some pretty impressive houses that didn't cost a lot of money. I mean, I spent 3 months in Chechnya, and they could build houses for cheap. In part, do you want to know how? No building codes whatsoever. Which sounds awesome, right? Amen. I can build my own house for cheap. This is great. I also met a lot of guys with less than 10 fingers. I've also seen a lot of, whoops, that wall caved in. So there's pros and cons here. A house that's built on sand, it's not necessarily that they don't have in your mind some person with no sense whatsoever who builds a house in the worst possible spot. This is a person who builds an impressive house that looks really nice, that looks just like the house built on rock. He just didn't bother to do all the foundation work. And the thing is, that could last for a really long time. It's not like the first rainstorm that comes, the whole house is going to fall down. It says here, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house. This is not just like the typical rains. These were storms, and storms didn't happen all that often, but they happened. The thing is, you could get away with being a foolish builder for a really long time. It would work until it didn't. The heavenly righteousness is founded on unseen efforts, but the results under pressure are visible to all. So this wise builder spent time and effort digging, building a foundation. Okay, how many of you ever walked into this building and said, wow, what a beautiful foundation this has. I am so impressed. I don't think any guest has ever walked into this church. I hate to pick on you, but you're seated right up front. Did you walk in and say, I am so impressed by the foundation of this building? No, it wasn't your first thing, right? Because you think, so why did we spend all this time and effort building a foundation? Because we wanted something that would last. In those days, if you were building a house that you intended to last you as a multi-generational house for the long term, you'd have to dig down to bedrock, because storms might not happen every day, but they happen, and you know that. So you dig down. Nobody sees it impresses nobody, but that hardcore foundational work is what makes it last. And you don't see the result until storm comes. So that wise man's house and that fool's house can be right next the door. And that fool's house might look beautiful, and he might have a great home and a great life, but when that storm comes, he's out. And how great is the fall thereof. This beautiful thing is now gone, where that wise man's house is going to stand for generations, because of unseen effort. God's heavenly righteousness is seen when storm comes. Now, this is easy to think through now because this is 2020. And the problem so far with 2020 is that it doesn't seem to end, right? So how is your righteousness holding up to 2020? Because if it was just a week, it would probably be fine. But 2020 has been a long year, hasn't it? Now, I'll be honest. 2020 at first, said, oh, there's a little bit of water in my basement. Okay, no big deal, but, as it wears on, I'm seeing a leaky roof now. I'm seeing those cracks in the wall that come up. My righteousness is not as secure as I thought it was. Storms come, and storms can last a long time. How is your righteousness holding up? How much of your righteousness was based on outside things, of making sure that the paint is really good, but not that deep, heart, foundational work? It's coming out right now, isn't it? And I'm ashamed to have to say, it's not been good to me. So, application. Let's look one last time at this text and at the sermon as a whole, based on this verse. But to this man will I look, even to him that's of a poor and contrite spirit that trembles at my word. And once again, as we see here, we want to apply these truths with humility, fear, and confident joy. First of all, humility. My righteousness is safely external, just like everyone else's. Come on, it is, isn't it? In a qualitative way, how different is my righteousness than any other religious person on earth, except I've got a slightly different set of rules. When I talk about standing up for righteousness, it's usually about what I say, not what I do. Because I really can get behind that, sign a petition, make my voice heard, do something. But the everyday living it out, I dare to think my ministry qualifies me as a righteous person, and I do. I think, you know what? I'm righteous. I'm teaching Sunday school. And we think, that we as a church, we're a good church because our bulletin is full. My righteousness is based on nothing, and it only stands because the storm hasn't hit yet. One strong wind and everything I have built up for a lifetime can blow away. One strong hit as a church, and everything that we've built up, that can just be gone. And finally, as a summary for this whole sermon, my righteousness is a stagnant set of external rules that flow from my own prideful interpretation of Scripture and only impacts a narrow segment of my life. My righteousness is man-centered. That's not a good thing. Fear. So all of the people who are going to spend eternity in hell, my righteousness sure looks a lot like theirs sometimes. If that doesn't scare you, it should. My false professions of righteousness will get out. People are going to know, because you will know them by their fruit. That tree will yield fruit. And as much as I talk a good game, the corruption of my heart will get out. I was just talking to Brandon again, and a part of our problem is we both have been here way too long. So all of you have seen our flaws. Same is true for a love you. I'm going to pick on Tom because it's fun. But I know more of his flaws than most people, because I've seen more of his flaws than I've seen of Steve's flaws, because I've lived with him. I've known him more and longer. And as we live in this church and in this world, people are going to see just how corrupt you are. Talk all how you want. They're going to find out. They always do. I can be so busy in ministry, I don't even have realized that I'm a stranger to Jesus. You can be unsaved and busy in church. And you can be saved, but it doesn't really mean much to you, because you've not really talked to Jesus in a really long time. My righteousness is breaking down under the strain of these times. And I think we've already talked about that. And as a summary for the whole sermon, that righteousness, even now, is abhorrent to the Most High God. Okay? Let me just let that sink in here. I'm not talking about pre-salvation. I'm not talking about, well, my old works were, those, that God hated, but, now, he likes my good stuff, even though, my prideful, outward self-righteousness, God hates it. And it's worthy of judgment. Even as a saved person, God can hate what I do. Christ is going to say over and over again, woe unto you, scribes and the Pharisees, hypocrites. He hated what he saw. And sometimes their righteousness is very alive in my heart. And God can see my life, and it is abhorrent. That's a terrifying thing. Last but not least, confident joy. When I walk the path of life with Jesus, his righteousness is present. Jesus and his righteousness are tied, and they cannot be separated. How can you possibly live a righteous life? Walk the narrow path with Jesus. He brings his righteousness with him. It's a package, the deal. I don't have to convince anyone I'm a good Christian. I can live his life in me, and it will flow out. And I can speak what he has me speak. I don't need your approval. I don't need I don't need the world's. I know Jesus. Sometimes I talk a really big game because I'm terrified. I don't need it to be. I know that Jesus. Therefore, my insignificant service is acceptable to him. I know him. He knows me. And those little things I do that nobody knows, nobody sees, that I think are of no value, he looks and he finds those things beautiful because I know him. My house may be small and unimpressive, but it is built on the rock of a real work of God in my heart. and it's going to stand the test of time. I'm not very righteous. If there's one thing I've learned from studying the Sermon on the Mount is I'm not very righteous. But I have some of the true righteousness of God that he puts in my heart, and that's going to stand. It's going to stand for all eternity. He will perform the good work he began in my heart. He will. It's going to stand. And all the rest might come crashing down, but that'll stand. And at the end of all things, that will still be there. And as a summary, Jesus has joined himself to me, creating a dynamic, pervasive reality of the heart that flows from his nature in me and is conforming every facet of my life into his image. This is happening right now in me, and I'm a mess. It's happening in us as a church. And we're a mess too. But it's happening because God has done a work in our hearts. Who is the head of Beth Eden Baptist Church? Jesus Christ. And everything that's good flows from him. The fact that he is our head means that his righteousness, his nature is joined to us. And it's going to flow throughout. It's going to change every aspect of what we do. It's going to change every aspect of who we are because he is our head. And that's a joyful thing. I look at my life and my church with great hope that because I and we are joined to Jesus. As a summary here, God's that measuring line. We've seen that the righteousness of the people of God is the dynamic, pervasive reality of the heart, which flows from a transformed soul and profoundly impacts every aspect of life. This is hard work. This is impossible work. And I'll tell you what, it is so much easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for me to live this way and for us to live this way. It is. But with God, nothing's impossible. Let me just, as a closing note here, I've compiled all these. So somebody asked me for the PowerPoints. I've compiled all of them into one document and erased the duplicates and merged the formatting, all that. If you do want that, email me or text me or talk to me, and I'll send that to you. I would encourage you to think on these things, pray on these things, and let these things really stew in your heart. Thank you very much for your time. Next Sunday we'll be hearing from Dan Sainange, so we look forward to that. You are dismissed.